Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So in this video we are going to study about history and development of forensic science. This is part 3 of Introduction to Forensic Science. I've already shared part 1 and part 2. I'll share the link in the description so you can check it out from there. And if you are new to the channel, do subscribe the channel and press the bell icon for the upcoming videos which I post. You get that at the earliest. So let's get started. So many scientists got expertise in the field of forensic science and they have contributed in different ways. So in this video we will study about the contribution made by them, starting with the very first scientist, who is Matthew Orfila. His full name was Matthew Joseph Bonaventure Orfila. He is considered as father of modern toxicology because of his very famous contribution. He was the first to publish a scientific paper on detection of poison and their effects on animals. He also developed a reliable and systematic method to detect poisonous substance in human body. He was a native of Spain and a teacher of medicine in France. So for exam point of view, this is very important because generally in net and fact exam, one or two question comes from this part. Another renowned scientist in this field is Alphonse Bertillon, who was a native of France and worked as French police officer. He was the first to discover scientific system of personal identification known as anthropometry or Bertillonage. It is a systematic procedure of taking a series of body measurements which was used to differentiate one individual from another. And because of his intensive work in the field of personal identification and identifying criminals through this process, he is considered as father of criminal investigation. And in one of his work, he has intensively written about this technique, and the work is La Photographie Judiciaire. It was published in the year 1890. This technique of personal identification was later on replaced by Sir Francis Galton by fingerprinting technique. Another very prominent scientist in this field is Sir Francis Galton. He was a native of England and he developed the method for classification of fingerprints. He classified fingerprints into three patterns: arch, whorl, and loop. His identification from fingerprint is still in use, and he laid a foundation for acceptance of fingerprint as evidence in court by publishing many articles, books, scholarly articles, and he also gave interviews for the same. Francis Galton published his book Fingerprints in 1892, and this book is still very famous. Another very renowned scientist in the field of forensic science is Sir Hans Gross, who was an Austrian criminologist and was popularly known as father of criminalistics or founding father of criminal profiling. So, in his publication Criminal Investigation in the year 1893, he helped to establish forensics in terms of transferring evidence from criminal to victim. Evidences such as dirt, fingerprint, carpet fibers, or hair were very common evidence which could transfer from criminal to the victim. And he was the first to utilize various techniques in the field of criminal investigation, scientific criminal investigation, which he has listed in his classic book Handbuch for Utter Such Richter. Here he described how we can take assistance of science in criminal investigation. Another very famous scientist in this field is Sir Edmund Locard, who was a French criminalist. He was the first to give the idea of exchange of particles in a crime scene, and he stated the theory that every contact leaves a trace, which later on was known as principle of exchange or Locard's principle of exchange. Based on this principle only, the scientific evidences are analyzed still today. And one of his very famous publication is Traité de Criminalistique, which means Treaty of Criminalistics. Another very famous scientist in this field is Sir Albert Osborne. Full name of Sir Albert Osborne is Albert Sherman Osborne. He was a native of Michigan, US. He is also known as father of question document examination. Now, question document is a document which has a disputed authenticity and it is not a genuine document. He also made significant contribution to the field of question document examination. One of his famous contribution was through his book publication titled Question Document in the year 1910, and after a few years in 1929 he published the second edition of the same book. His another publication were The Problem of Proof 1922, The Mind of the Juror 1937, and Question Document Problems 1944. I have listed these books or these publication over here because it is very important for the exam point of view. In NET exam generally it is asked. Another very famous scientist in the field of serology is Dr. Karl Landsteiner, who was a native of Austria. He classified blood groups into four groups and he published a paper in year 1901 about his discovery of ABO blood group. Before this discovery, he claimed that the blood groups are inherited, and because of his intensive work in blood grouping and immunochemistry, he got Nobel Prize also in this field. And also he is credited as father of blood grouping and immunochemistry. Later on, Dr. Leon Lettice, in the field of serology again, he also devised a very efficient yet very simple technique of determining blood group from dried blood stain. He was an Italian physicist and his discovery is still in use. He is also credited as father of blood stain identification. So another very prominent scientist in the field of forensic science is Calvin Hooker Goddard. Specifically in the field of forensic ballistics, he devised the technique of comparing a fired bullet with the test one. Because of his intensive research work, today one can very easily identify whether a particular weapon has been used for firing a bullet or not. In his whole research work, he used comparison microscope for comparing the fired bullet with the test one, and he also gave several significant developments in the field of ballistics during his career. He also constructed a most comprehensive ballistic database of its time. Because of his intensive research work in the field of ballistics, he is known as father of forensic ballistics. So another very prominent scientist in the field of forensic toxicology is Sir James Marsh, who was a British chemist. He developed a very trustworthy and easy lab technique for detecting minute level of arsenic also from the samples. Today this technique is known as Marsh test or Marsh arsenic test. It can be employed for detecting arsenic from food samples, liquids, or deceased human tissue which is recovered from the crime scene. Next very famous scientist is Lawrence Cresta in the field of forensic science. He was the one who gave audio analysis technique in mid 1960s and was an engineer from New Jersey. He also researched sound identification technique for FBI, and in one of his research article he stated that Voice print identification is a spectrographic method by which people can be identified through their voices very easily. So he used spectrographic technique to identify individuals, and this technique is still used today. Also, this technique is in use.